Welcome everyone to the third annual Openci campus celebration. Thanks for coming. This is a great turnout. As you might know, I'm Jacob Jenkins. I'm a faculty in communication and one of the campus coordinators for our Openci initiative.
And I'm Jamie Hannons. I'm also the other campus coordinator from nursing. So this is really exciting because we started our first celebration in the Fit Studio. We had standing room. So we had about 25, 30 people, but we thought it was really exciting and we were thinking, this is great. The celebration's here. People know about us. They're engaged. And really it had, I think at that time, more of a faculty focus. But now to have student government representation from, I see students from all different programs, faculty, staff, we're just so excited that it's grown so much. And just so you know, part of the celebration started because our grant funding from the CSU Chancellor's Office and the Affordable Learning Solutions effort asked that we do a celebration. And that's really rewarding because I feel like it gives us an opportunity to really acknowledge all of the work of faculty and the interest of faculty to stay student-centered and really address the ongoing needs of trying to look at textbook affordability, quality, impact, access, and try to make sure your education remains high standards. So thank you for being here.
And speaking of faculty acknowledgements, we have a slate of exciting things over the next 5 to 6 hours. And one of the first things is a faculty awards recognition we'll have here in a second. And followed by that, we're going to hear from our keynote, Hal Plotkin, who's already sitting right up here, for those of you who can see him. And then we'll have a student panel right up here to wrap things up. But before all of that, we need opening remarks from there's the agenda if you hadn't already seen it. We need opening remarks from our university president that we're so happy was able to join us today. We know her time is very valuable, and so we're appreciative of that. And with that, though, I'm going to hand it to Liz Newmeyer, who's going to give her an official introduction. And we will get out of the way because we know no one came to hear us.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'm Liz Newmeyer, the Chief of Staff for Student Government here at CI, and it is my pleasure to introduce a pivotal leader at CI, President Beck. Under her leadership since 2016, we've actually received the Seal of Excellencia, which only 9 universities in the nation receive, so it's a huge deal. Additionally, we've had about $42.1 million secured of funding for one-time and permanent appropriations from the state. On top of that, we've also secured $79.6 million of funding and capital for construction and referred maintenance. And then we've also been recognized under her leadership by many different places, but Money Magazine has named us the 9th most transformative institutions. And also, CollegeNet has also ranked us the 5th university for the Social Mobility Index, and we actually have 11 construction projects underway in the next 5 years. So it's a huge deal, and we have so much going on at CI, and we definitely have a huge supporter in our president for this Openci initiative that we have on campus. So if we can all just put our hands together for President Beck.
Well, Liz did such a great job that I'm just going to end it there, call it an afternoon, and let you get on from. Thank you, Liz, for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for being here today for this celebration, Openci, that is a celebration of the work that we're doing here on campus, but really is a celebration more broadly of our commitment to staying at the forefront of the future of higher education, the future of learning, and the future of the advancement of knowledge. You know, the circumstances that have shaped higher education for literally hundreds of years are changing, and they are changing rapidly in a whole variety of ways. But most relevant to the conversation that will be happening here today is that universities used to have a very particular role as keepers of knowledge. As keepers of knowledge in very large libraries, and that would be accessible to only a select few. And of course, now we know that materials are available in many formats to wider varieties of audiences, and that they could be explored in new ways. It's great technological transformation. It's a little heartbreaking for those of us who spent like years of my life in giant stacks, individually Xeroxing journal articles. Do you even know what a Xerox is? I'm looking at all of our students. Do you even know what that is? It's a little heartbreaking for me. But the development of open educational resources has provided an incredible opportunity to leverage those materials in such a way that facilitates the central role of an academic community and a university, the ability to help our students, so many of whom are here today, realize their greatest educational aspirations and walk across that commencement stage to a life that is forever transformed. But it also presents the opportunity to transform knowledge more quickly and with larger audiences as we work together in the pursuit of truth and the advancement of many fields, including one ever present at this particular moment, the advancement of science. Our campus is literally leading the nation in this work. Oh, you can clap for that. Leading the nation in how do you reimagine higher education for a new generation and a new era by very specifically looking at how you integrate open educational resources into the curriculum to enhance the quality, to enhance access, to enhance equity, and to enhance affordability. I know that all of you are aware, I know that our students are particularly aware that the cost of textbooks has escalated in recent years, really placing significant strain on students' ability to pursue their academic journeys. So I am incredibly proud of the work that we're here to celebrate today with Openci, and the work that a collection of individuals across the university has committed to in thinking about how we really reimagine our students' needs and our academic community's needs. So you may know, some of you may not know, that we actually now have 3 zero-cost textbook programs here at Cal State Channel Islands. 3. You can clap for that too. Communication, health science, and early childhood studies are the first, not just at Cal State Channel Islands, the first in the California State University system, and I think our guest speaker has something more to say about the first in the country, which is incredible. But even more than that, our faculty are reimagining the way that they facilitate teaching and learning. And by doing all of this and reducing the textbook costs to date, we have saved our students, our faculty, our staff, our Openci team has saved our students, are you ready? $2.9 million in textbook costs. So I want to thank the entire Openci team. Can we get a big round of applause for Openci? It's a collaborative effort. It involves faculty, it involves staff, it involves IT, it involves the library, it involves so many different places on campus coming together to create the collective will to reimagine higher education in service of our academic community and academic communities around the world. So thank you for being here. I'm so very proud of everything that you guys have accomplished, and I hope that you enjoy the celebration.
So before we hear from our keynote, we want to keep the positive energy going and maybe move to the awards section. So we have a few. You can do it. There we go. We have a few programs as well as a few individuals that we would like to recognize for their efforts they've made this past year to help lead the way with OpenCI and the interconnection we see between basic needs, between student equity, a number of other things that this all ties into. And I guess even before that though, would Liz and Isaiah, maybe would you come back up and help with the awards ceremony? Because before that also, we would like to take a moment to thank the great number of people that even helped this event happen behind the scenes and all the work we've been doing over the past year, of course. I'm thinking of the Teach and Learn Innovations group. Could you maybe stand up or raise your hand or something? You know who you are. And Ben Heitrick, specifically Ben, I know you're mad at me right now for doing this, but he's over here hiding, shaking his head and giving me a mean look for all your work you've done. I really do appreciate it. And our leads as well. I think most, if not all of our program leads are in the room. So if you could stand up or wave, please. Maria Ballaricera, I see you right here in the middle. Lauren is right up here. And we also have Megan Kinney-Feaster from Communication and Kristen Linton. Is Kristen? I thought I saw Kristen from Health Sciences. And even let you all know without getting too much into the weeds as we introduce the zero textbook cost majors that President Beck referred to. These are our leads within those programs that are kind of keeping a pulse on what's happening and make sure the pathway stays open, being liaison, what do we say, liaison in between us and the programs, throughout the year. And so they're an integral part of all of this. And then another main person we wanted to thank who may not be here, but we can go ahead and repeat it later perhaps, is Jill Leifstead, who many of you know is the AVP and the director of the entire Teach and Learn Innovations group. Recently, could you get this, grab this maybe? Recently, one of my students in class, and it was somebody that was probably out there, asked what OpenCI is. The question was, what is OpenCI? What is Teach and Learn Innovations? And in that moment, I immediately remembered how it's a little bit difficult to define it because there's so many things going on, there's so many relationships and whatnot. But then the next thought that came to mind was that Jill Leifstead defines it. That's the thing that ties it all together. That's the person who brought us all together. That's the person who empowers us, the person who encourages us, the person that pushes us, the person that supports us. And so if you're looking for a definition of what this is all about, in some ways, I would give the credit entirely to Jill Leifstead as a person that defines, what the good work that we're doing here together. So we're very appreciative of that. And we have some flowers in a card and of course a unicorn keychain that you all can, be thankful for her in this moment, and whenever she does arrive, maybe we can do it all over again. So let's give her a round of applause. And, so now for the faculty awards, maybe we'll begin with the programs. We have 3 this year that are at different stages of development. The first being business and economics. If anyone is here in representation, I know Susan's in a meeting, was unable to come last minute. So each of these awards we're about to give, the recognition really is just the idea that these are program level efforts that are happening across campus. And that's how we got to the zero textbook cost majors in communication, early childhood studies, health sciences, is this wasn't just, certainly wasn't just me and Jamie plugging away doing something. It was this really concerted effort with people coming together, looking at the curriculum and figuring out a pathway to go through, right? And right now we just have some really exciting, big level things happening. The first being in business and economics that are currently addressing taking low cost efforts. I just want to say it correctly so we're not over promising or anything like that, right? They're taking concerted low cost efforts to really bring down the cost overall of their major and to find a pathway that, if not a zero textbook cost pathway, would really lower that cost, if that makes sense. So I think Maria's here on behalf of business and econ. Come on up. And Isaiah has your trophy. Open this beast up. Show everybody how beautiful this is. That's better than an Oscar. Second, we have, what order do we put them in? Yeah, special education. Is there a representative from special education here? Excellent. And what's exciting about this one is again a program level effort, to be clear, but this is a zero textbook cost credential program in a specialist education specialist credential program. But what's exciting about that, if I can nerd out for a moment, is the fact that as we understand it, We are the first again in the entire CSU and the first that we know of even beyond that to offer a zero textbook cost credential program in such a way. So that's, yes. So we have the majors, now we have the credentials, and on behalf of the entire student body, thank you. And last but not least, for the program efforts, and we have a few faculty we would like to recognize and call attention to as well, because even though it is a group effort, it's not possible without the individuals leading from the front lines, as I say, right? And this was for the nursing track, RN to BSN, if anyone would like to come forward. I know Jamie is already up here, someone else from nursing. That the efforts are not 100% complete, so this is about the efforts. Again, I'm just trying not to overpromise or say too much, but the idea of it's a fast track from an RN degree to a BSN in nursing. And yet again, once this gets complete, we're almost there. That once it gets complete, it'll be the first Z track in the entire CSU, and we like to think in the entire world. On behalf of nursing, so be sure and thank those programs and those faculty. If you're in those programs and didn't realize that they were taking these efforts for your benefit from a student perspective, be sure and thank them. And maybe now you even have a better understanding of what's going on. If you've heard some of these words, if you've heard Z major, Openci, different things, maybe you know what that even means now. So then that brings us to the faculty awards. We have 4, but now I lost my people. We have 4 faculty we would like to recognize. This was, just for the record, too much behind the scenes information. This was very hard for us to figure out how to do this. We wanted to recognize some faculty. We realized that we couldn't come up with a system that was the perfect system, and there's so many people doing so many good things. So for this year being our inaugural faculty OpenCI awards, we decided to look at our reporting and see who was saving money. We thought, okay, this is a way that we can objectively look and measure, and we can stand behind that. And when we did, but we didn't know what that was even going to mean. Are we going to reward the person that saved the most money? And what we found after crunching the numbers is there were 4 faculty on campus that saved their students just this past academic year over $20,000. So that became a natural kind of tier 1, we felt like. We're like, wow, that's amazing. There were 15, 16 faculty that saved well over 10 grand, just for the record. So there's just so many faculty from every program across the entire campus doing fabulous things, but we just had to have a cutoff somewhere at some point for sake of time. So we thought that created a natural kind of tier 1. So these are all faculty that if you just come up as you can when you hear your name, that again have saved the students just this past academic year, 2018, 2019, over $20,000 each. And so first I have Leslie Abel. If Leslie is here, saved well over $23,000. Leslie. And Liz will accept this beautiful certificate on her behalf. Second, we have Katie Elder, who I happen to know is in LA for a previous appointment, who can't make it. So Katie Elder from Communication saved over $21,000. So yeah. Mark Jepson, our third from Sociology, well over $23,000. And last but not least, Jackie Sherman, if we have Jackie, from nursing, and well over $20,000. And I think Jackie had class at the time, was simply unable to make it, but still we like the idea of recognizing her even when she's not here, and we'll make sure we get these certifications to her. So with that, I'm supposed to hand it off to Isaiah, who's conveniently here already, to introduce our keynote speaker, which is why you all did come, right?
Greetings, everybody. My name is Isaiah Ball. I am the Student Government Vice President, and it is an honor to be introducing our keynote speaker, Mr. Hal Plotkin, today for you all. Mr. Plotkin is a writer, a journalist, an activist, and a staunch supporter of open educational resources, as well as textbook affordability for all students. Mr. Plotkin, at an early age, like him and his sister had to depart from school because of financial hardship. And as a result of this financial hardship, it would only go on to fuel him to become the champion for open educational affordability and textbook affordability that he is today. Mr. Plotkin served as the secretary for the Senior Secretary Advisor for Open Educational Resources and under the administration for Barack Obama. And from 2014 to 2017, he was a Senior Policy Fellow for the Creative Commons Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization which is dedicated to globally creating an accessible commons of knowledge and culture for everybody. He currently is a consultant for the Promise Campaign, which is based in Washington, D.C., and he is also a consulting fellow for the, or my apologies. He's also a consulting fellow for the the Foundation Mason de Science de Orum. In each one of these arenas, yeah, I try. In each one of these arenas, he tirelessly advocates for students and it tirelessly advocates for open educational resources and accessible post-education for all students, as well as textbook affordability. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Hal Plotkin.
Wow, what a great group. It's so nice to see all of you here. Let me set my little, there, I got it done. Because I care so much about this stuff, I'd be yammering at you until the sun went down, and that wouldn't be fair to any of you. And here's my little clicker. It's a delight to be here, and let me begin, of course, by thanking Jamie and Jill and Jacob and Lauren and Christy, who's here somewhere, and congratulate all of the award winners today. And those of you, oh, there's Jill in the middle there. You have, and I travel all over the country actually these years, all over the world, meeting with innovators in the higher education space. There's no place that I would rather be. And I'm so delighted to be here with you today and to see so many of you. I frankly thought with all of the stuff about the virus that has panicked our country and panicked the world today that we'd be lucky to see 8 or 10 of you and then to see a room full. It's wonderful. Because today's talk is really not about me, it's about you. And it's about who you are and where you are and the opportunities that are in front of you. There are some world-shaking history makers in this room today. I know that. You don't know who you are yet, but you're here. And you're going to make a big difference because of the resources that you have available and because of the opportunities that this institution has made possible. I also want to thank President Beck. I gather she had to leave for other tasks, but I had a great opportunity to spend some time today with her at lunch, brainstorming about the future opportunities that she's working on developing for this campus, for the faculty leaders here, and for the students. And I couldn't be more thrilled about the future that you have ahead of you and the world that you're going to shape. I probably have to point this at something to get it to work. All right. Let's see here. Of course, it would be my luck to have the battery fail just at the. There we are. Good. I apologize. Most of you can't see this, so I'll tell you a little bit about it, but this has my sort of professional credentials. But let me begin today by telling you a little bit about myself. And I tell you about it not because I'm important, but because I suspect that when you hear my story, it'll sound familiar to many of yours. And Jacob, could I get you to grab my water, which I forgot up there, because I've been losing my voice lately, doing a lot of talking, and I can feel it may happen soon. So my name is Hal Plotkin, and I grew up in a single-parent family, raised by, for the most of my teenage years, my sister and I were raised, as Isaiah pointed out in his generous introduction, in a single-parent family on welfare and food stamps. My sister and I both left high school. I think I was in 10th grade, she was even in 9th grade. Because our mom was sick, couldn't work. The bank was threatening to take away our house. Mail would just pile up. Mom was mentally ill often, couldn't open the mail. I don't know if any of you ever lived in a house like that where the mail just piles up, the bills pile up. Why do you open the bills if you can't pay them? You know, it's just depressing. My sister and I both left high school to work in the same pizza parlor, not too far walking distance from our home. One day, I was on a work break in the pizza parlor, and I happened to look at the local newspaper, the Palo Alto Times. And there was a story in there about high school dropouts. And it was, and the more I read the story, the angrier I got. The story was full with all of this stuff about, you know, what's wrong with these kids? They must not understand that they're throwing away their futures. Probably a lot of them are taking drugs or exhibiting other antisocial behavior. It was just full of all, and it, you know, it made all of these pejorative references to dropouts. And I was furious because I knew it didn't reflect my experience or the experience of my younger sister, Sam. And I went home that night and I wrote a letter to the editor on binder paper with a pencil about how angry I was, for starters, that they were even using the word dropout. I insisted that what they ought to do just before they described the situation that they didn't understand is that they ought to talk to people who were actually in that situation, not these experts that they quoted in their article who were speculating about our character flaws that had led us to leave school, but instead talk to us. And that if they did, they'd find out that for starters, the word dropout was the wrong word. And that really they should call us what we were, which was pushouts. And we were pushed out of high school, I explained, because we didn't have any money. We were going to lose our home. We had a mortgage payment to help my mom make. I still remember. It was, you'll laugh now at how long ago this was. This was for a house in Palo Alto, California. $287.50 a month. But that's how much money that we needed every month. And if we couldn't come up with that money, and if we went 3 months without paying it, we were at risk of the sheriff coming and evicting us from our house. And a couple of times we got within 72 hours, where the 72-hour notice was tapped up on the door, that we had 72 hours to come up with the $287.50 a month. My sister and I were making $1.75 an hour at the pizza parlor. The boss would pay us in cash from the cash register every night before we would walk home. And our goal at the end of every month was to make sure that mom had at least the $287.50 that we needed to get the mortgage paid. So I wrote a letter to the editor explaining all of this and insisting that, for starters, they should stop calling us dropouts. And they should call us what we were, pushouts. And what's more, when we were pushed out of school, they should understand that nobody came looking for us. Nobody cared at all at that time. Every once in a while, the school would send some kind of a notice to my mom that we were missing school, but it would just be another piece of mail that didn't get answered or didn't even get opened. And an entire school year or more went by under these circumstances. And that if they would just begin by describing us as what we were, pushouts rather than dropouts, because dropouts sounded kind of like we did it to ourselves. We made a choice, you know, we had a choice and we just made the bad choice. That if they described pushouts as what we were, that maybe that would then lead to a different understanding among policymakers and school administrators and all of the people we had to rely on that might look at the real needs that people like us had. And put the letter into the envelope and I sent it away with a stamp to the letters to the editor of the local paper. A few days later, a wonderful man, a guy named Paul Vokes, I still remember him, the editorial page editor of the local newspaper, tracked me down at the pizza parlor. I guess he wanted to find out if I was really real. And he came to talk to me over the counter and he said that they liked my letter so much that he wondered if they could publish it as a guest editorial and pay me $50. $50. I was working making $1.75 an hour. So I said, of course they can. And within a couple of days, right there in the local newspaper, there was my first published article by Hal Plotkin, right on the same page with an article by William F. Buckley, who was a big, well-known political commentator at the time, and Mary McGrory, another very famous writer back in those days. And there was Mary McGrory, William F. Buckley, Hal Plotkin, same typeface, the same size. And so a career as a writer was born. I decided that from just seeing my own byline, that was maybe something I could do. And I started writing. Initially, I would go to the library, and I would check out or take a look at, for example, a magazine that I was interested in. And I'd read the last 12 or 15 issues of the magazine, and I would think about, like, what article ought to be in that magazine. And then I would get in touch with the publisher, and I would send the publisher a copy of my article that had already been published to show them I was a writer, and then pitch them on an article. And of course, most of them said no, but some of them said yes. One of my early schemes was I wanted to become an international correspondent. I wanted to be able to travel outside of California and see the world. But of course, nobody would hire a young writer, even with the few little bylines that I had accumulated by then for that. So but I'd made some relationships at some of these business magazines I started to work for. Right around then, Silicon Valley was just starting to become a something. And publications in New York and elsewhere, Los Angeles and elsewhere around the world, were interested in what was going on in our area. And many of them couldn't afford to establish their own beats. But since I was in that area, I would offer to be able to do some coverage for them from the Silicon Valley area, and carefully looking at what they'd published to make sure that I wasn't pitching them on something they'd already done. And little by little, I slowly managed to create a career for myself as a writer, and then a local broadcaster. I got hired by a local radio station to do news and commentary and things like that. One thing led to another. The radio program that I started in the San Francisco Bay Area eventually ended up as the #1 program in its time slot. I got invited to join the public radio network, which was at the time thinking about starting a new program called Marketplace. Maybe some of you have heard it. It's still broadcast today. I was one of the 3 founding editors of Marketplace, which we started actually at CSU Long Beach in 1987. There were initially 3 or 4 of us. The last time I checked in, the main studio has now 27 full-time employees with bureaus all over the world and hundreds of millions of listeners every year. And eventually I had some success as a correspondent, foreign correspondent. I managed to kludge that together again with sort of smoke and mirrors. I called up one publication and told them that I was going to be going to China to do a story about Chinese and American business interactions, and that another publication was paying for my ticket, so they wouldn't have to pay for my ticket, but I could do a story for them while I was there, since the other publication was paying for my ticket. And then the first publication agreed to buy an article from me, and then I called up another publication and I told them that that publication was actually paying for my ticket, and that since they didn't have to pay for my ticket, and by the time I finished this daisy chain of phone calls, I had 3 or 4 publications agreeing in advance to buy articles from me, and I used that money to buy the ticket that none of them ever wanted to pay. And what do you know it, I was an international correspondent. Marketplace led to some success. I ended up working for, getting hired to be the Silicon Valley correspondent for CNBC when they started their website. And at the same time, stayed in community college, worked my way through Foothill Community College. It took me 8 years of working full-time and going to school part-time to get my associate's degree in history at Foothill Community College. By then, I'd banked some money, and a distant relative had offered some help, and I stopped working for a little while, and I went to San Jose State University, where I got my undergraduate degree in behavioral sciences in a year or two, and managed 10 years after enrolling in college as an 18-year-old working full-time at the pizza parlor to graduate from San Jose State University with a bachelor's degree, and more importantly, and as importantly, a career as a writer and a journalist, which is what I did for 20 or 25 years of my life. I kind of fell into public service through a story that I will illustrate for you as we move through this. When the during my college years, though, and there were many times when working and trying to get my career launched as a journalist, it was very hard financially to survive. And the money problems that I experienced would recur because I had no safety net under me. You know, there was nobody that I could turn to with a big checkbook who could help me out of jams. One day, I was at Foothill Community College early in my college career when my professor, Professor Truman Cross, Western Civilization professor, suddenly was handing out the essay exams that he had assigned earlier that day, or earlier that week. And he was handing out the essay exams upon completion. And as he handed them out, he said, "Is Mr. Plotkin in the room?" And very nervous, I raised my hand from the back and I said, "Here I am." He said, "Mr. Plotkin, would you please stay after class? I would like to talk to you a little bit." And I was really nervous then, just in a complete panic. I thought, what had I done? Had I inadvertently plagiarized somebody, you know? Had I offended him in some way with the essay answer that I gave? So I waited around until all of the other students had left the class, and I approached Professor Cross. And I said, "Professor Cross, I'm Hal Plotkin. You wanted to speak with me." And he said, "Mr. Plotkin, I just wanted you to know that your essay was one of the finest essays that I've ever read in all the years I've been teaching this class. And I wanted to know what you're doing for dinner tonight." And I was just flabbergasted to have that be what he wanted to say. So I said, "Well, I was going to go to Jack in the Box or, something like that. It was in my budget." He said, "Well, good. Then you're coming to my house for supper." And he invited me to his house, and he introduced me to his wife, and offered to extend himself in any way that he could to see if he could help in my college studies, which had been dragging on for quite some time. About 3 or 4 weeks later, I missed his class 2, 3 times in a row, and my phone rang at home. And he said, "Mr. Plotkin, this is Professor Cross. I noticed you weren't in class the last 2 or 3 times. What happened?" And I explained to him that my car had broken down and that I couldn't get to and from work. I was working at that time at the Walgreens drugstore, having left the pizza parlor, and also writing at night, trying to get things published as best I could. And that I couldn't get my car fixed without working extra hours at work. So I'd have to drop out of his class and make enough money to get my car fixed, but that he shouldn't worry because I would retake his class the next semester. I often found myself, that's why it took so many years to get through school, because I didn't have the money to make sure that I could get through a whole term. And Professor Cross said, "Well, what do you need? How much do you need to fix your car?" And I said, "Well, the alternator's broken. The mechanic says it'll be about $200. And he says, "Are you home?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Can you stay there for at least 40 minutes? And I said, "Yes." And he just hung up the phone. I wonder what that's about. And 35 minutes later, the knock on the door in my shared apartment. I open the door and it's Professor Cross. And he hands me 10 $20 bills. He says, here's your $200. I'll see you in class on Monday, right? Right? So I'm telling you these stories, not because I'm unique or unusual, but I'm telling you these stories because I want you to know that I know who you are, right? I know and understand the lives that you live. And for the faculty members that are in this room who extend yourselves to help the students who are around you today, I know who you are too. And that is the source of the emotion I feel at this moment and the gratitude that's in my heart for having a chance to be with you here today to share this important message about who you are now and who you are and can be in the future, and what this place, what CSUCI can and will be and is positioned to be in the future. So that's a long-winded introduction, but I hope it serves as an introduction, not to me, again, not to me, but to you, to remind yourselves that the struggles that you have endured, many of you in this room have endured, that put your seats, put your butts in the seats that you're in today as you seek to better yourselves and obtain the education and training and credentials that are necessary to build the lives that you want to have, are the reason that this initiative, this Openci initiative exists, and the reason that I'm here with you today. Some things in life are obvious. I thought that that was true when the internet boom got started. Again, I happened to be living in Palo Alto, growing up in poverty. And when the internet and digital technologies suddenly became available, you know, I was a kid, I grew up in the world of analog typewriters. When it came time at Foothill College for me to type my first term paper, they used to have typewriters that were for rent near the library in a big typewriter room. And you'd pay 25 cents an hour to rent time on a typewriter so you could type your paper. So all of this stuff happened. The digital technologies happened around me. And one of the big promises about the advent of digital technologies first, networking later, is that they were going to be a great boon to education. Because we were eliminating the costs of printing things and duplicating things and warehouses and things like that, that educational opportunities and educational resources would become ubiquitously available. And so that seemed like one of the obvious things. I owe this to my, I don't know if you can see it, but I owe these following slides to my dear friend and treasured colleague, Dr. Cable Green, who directs the education programs at Creative Commons. But I don't know if you can see what it says here. There's a picture of a parking meter and there's a little sign under it which says no meter. It's pretty obvious that that's what it is. There's a sign here on the telephone that identifies it as a telephone. Some things you don't really need signs for, right? I don't know if the people in the back, this is a picture of a meadow, but they've labeled it just in case you miss the fact that it's a meadow. Somebody had to think that one up, but it's, you know, right? That's, I guess, so the person who puts the paper towels in knows where to put the paper towels. Right? These are real pictures that my friend Cable has discovered or come up with or found as he's traveling around. Right? Some things just seem so obvious that you don't need a sign for them. That one says no diving. Somebody who needs that information is, well, maybe too late to help them. Yeah, this, yeah. You wouldn't have figured that out, huh? Right? All right. So one of the obvious things is that the internet and digital technologies should make it available, should make it possible for all of us to get access to the educational resources that we need at little to no cost. I mean, that was the Homebrew Computer Club where Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak met. One of the things that they were all working on at the time, the reason they were so excited about computers was the Mid-Peninsula Free University, which the idea was that they would use this great new thing called digital technologies and computers in order to make educational opportunities more ubiquitously available. The reason for that is because the internet and digital technologies changed the realities of what's possible in education and scholarship. You know, this is the history that my friend David Wiley, who I think you heard from yesterday, put together. Maybe, or he'll be here tomorrow. I may be stealing. You may see this slide again tomorrow. I'm not sure. It's one of David's old slides. But, you know, this is kind of the evolution of how scholarly materials were shared over the centuries. back before printing presses, everything had to be laboriously copied by scribes. You can figure out how expensive that was and how few people could actually access copies of it. And then you had copying, you know, by President Beck mentioned Xerox machines or printing presses, still much less than copying by hand, but a cost, and you needed warehouses, and you needed trucks, and delivery, and salespeople, and marketing, and illustrations, and all the rest. And then you get down to copying scholarly materials by computer, and look, it's a fraction of a penny. It's like when you add in all of the costs that are involved in making a copy of something, of a learning material, it comes out to, what is it, 1/1000th of a penny. So the learning resources should be available ubiquitously and free, since we have these technologies which have so reduced the costs. Once you've paid for or compensated or maybe a motivated volunteer has provided the content, the actual costs that are involved in copying these materials and distributing have dropped through the floor. So you would think that the cost of textbooks ought to follow a dramatic process of price de-escalation. But actually the opposite thing happened, as many of you know too well. If this is the case, if the cost falls down to 1/1000th of a penny, then why does a physics textbook cost $300? You know, and what kind of a barrier does that create for people for whom $300 would otherwise be their transportation budget or their childcare budget or their food budget? And how many barriers for progress and for success are created by these high costs? So why is it? And the same thing with distributing things. That was the cost of producing things. But when you know, the old days when you'd have to mail out a textbook or send it by a truck, there was a cost associated with that. But the distribution of learning resources on the internet, again, is in the thousandths of a penny per copy. So the cost of copying something, the cost of distributing something fell to almost nothing. At the exact same time, the cost of learning resources were growing faster than the general cost of inflation by a substantial margin. So copy and distribute are essentially free. This changes everything, says my friend David Wiley, or at least it should change everything. But initially it didn't. And that led to the creation of Creative Commons, which is the organization I've long been associated with. How many of you have ever heard of Creative Commons? Don't be shy to raise your hand. Good. It's fair that most of you haven't. So let me tell you just a little bit about it. One of the things that happened at the early days of the internet was people would start putting things on the internet that they didn't have the right to put on the internet. Maybe they take somebody's copyrighted materials that somebody copyrighted and wanted to sell, and they'd put it on the internet, and it's essentially stealing the resources from that person, stealing their creative labor, just like pirated movies or pirated TVs steal from the artists who created them. And there was no way, when you looked on the internet, for you to determine which things were on the internet and that you were legally and properly allowed to use, and which things were where you were participating in essentially a felony of stealing things that had been improperly taken from an author or a creative person. And so there was a need to create a new legal framework in cases where somebody wanted to create something that they wanted to share. So to use Creative Commons licenses, Creative Commons is an organization that provides free intellectual property licenses that the owners of intellectual property can use to legally and freely share materials that they've created. So it's not an alternative to copyright. It's built on top of copyright. You can't share something you don't own. But if you own something, if you've created a math resource or a sociology resource or an English resource, and you want to share it, you can go to the Creative Commons website and you can download a little bug that you can put onto your electronic document, which links back to our licenses, and which gives in advance permission to the person who finds that material, which says, you know, we've created this, we intend for you to share it. There's a different set of conditions that the owners of intellectual property can use on their intellectual property licenses. Some people, for example, might say, you can share this freely, but you can't sell it. If you sell it, you owe me the money. But if you're giving it away and you're not selling it, then that's fine, or you can use it. Some of them say you can build on it. You can adjust the license, so it says you can take this textbook that I created and you can add a new chapter. That's fine with me, as long as you identify where my chapters were and what I created, and you identify what you created. We call that the CC BY, or the CC attribution license, which allows people to build on works that then get collaboratively shared. And we started Creative Commons, I guess, about 18 years ago. I had the honor of writing the first public article that was ever written about the idea that became Creative Commons about a year later, that we needed a new legal framework. Larry Lessig, a lawyer at Stanford University, a law professor at Stanford at the time, was the creator of the world's first set of intellectual property licenses. A 14-year-old young man who I knew, Aaron Schwartz, a movie was made about him not long after his suicide a few years ago, was the technologist who slapped together the first website that let people put together and apply these intellectual property licenses. When we created the Creative Commons intellectual property license, and when I wrote about it the first time, a lot of people said, well, this is a fool's errand. Why would you even think the world would want to have an intellectual property license for people who would want to give things away? Who would go to all the trouble to create an intellectual property resource, a book or a guide or a set of worksheets or whatever, and then want to give it away? Nobody's going to use these licenses. That was what we heard in the early days. Well, a couple of years ago, we issued our 1 billionth intellectual property license. There are now more than 1 billion pieces of intellectual property that you can find on the internet that are legally licensed for sharing. And the biggest users, it turned out, which we didn't really entirely anticipate, but the biggest users of these Creative Commons intellectual, and you'll find us by just going online to creativecommons.org, where you'll see information about what we do and how you can access these licenses for free. But the biggest users of it turned out to be educators. And so we went and we talked with these educators who were creating learning resources, sharing them with each other, using these licenses, collaboratively improving the learning resources so they became better generation after generation. These we call open educational resources. And they are the basis of these zero textbook cost degree programs that you now have here at CSUCI. What we discovered in talking with these educators is that many, maybe even most of the people who became educators because they wanted to educate the next generation. What a surprise. It turns out they weren't all there trying to get rich. As a matter of fact, if they were trying to get rich, you know, they would have gone to Wall Street or found some other job. But most all of the people who find themselves as professional educators have in their heart a passion for helping the next generation and for sharing what they know to make the life of the people who follow them a little easier and to build humanity to a somewhat better place. And that what these licenses, what these Creative Commons licenses did, is it essentially licensed the good hearts in all of these people to find expression and to work together and collaborating and helping one another improve the availability of educational resources. Coming back to that thing that should be obvious, which is that we now have these tools and these technologies, digital tools, digital technologies, networking, which made it possible to share educational resources and to collaboratively improve them. And what do you know? There were millions of people around the world who wanted to do just that, who weren't in it for a buck, but were in it for what they could do for each other, for their students, and for the next generation. But not everybody. And this is where the clash of visions is important. And for you to realize that we are in a fight for the future right now in terms of how these tools and technologies are used. And I have to tell you that part of my work and part of the reason I've been focused on this the last 10 or 15 years is a form of penance because I mentioned that I did all this work as a journalist in Silicon Valley in my younger years. And a lot of the stories that I wrote back then, especially my first, 50 or 100, make me cringe now. Because a lot of the people who talked to me about what these new, and who I wrote, I quoted them in my stories and in my radio broadcasts about what these new technologies would do, were talking about how the technology was going to make it possible for education to become more freely available at higher quality to more people. And as if there was something inherent in the tool itself that would determine how the tool would be used. But what I learned over time is that digital technologies and networking are just like any other tool. The tool doesn't decide how it's going to be used. The tool user decides how the tool is going to be used. A hammer can be used to build a house or to knock down a house. The hammer doesn't decide. The person wielding the hammer decides. And it's the same thing with digital tools and digital technologies. The users decide. The colleges, the universities, the teachers, the students, the public, the community. Early in my career, when I first started writing about this, I got invited out to have lunch with a senior executive from John Wiley & Sons, the big textbook publisher. They are still around. And they wanted to recruit me to help represent their entrance into the world of digital publishing. They were moving from the old analog textbooks to digital publishing, and they were really, really excited. And the guy across the table who was trying to recruit me for this job, which paid a lot of money, more money than I had ever been offered before, was explaining why they were so excited about digital technologies. And it was the complete flip side of everything that the technologists themselves who had helped created these technologies were talking about. The first thing he said he was so excited about was that digital technologies would wipe out the market for used textbooks. The textbook publishers hated used textbooks because, they'd sell a textbook at a really high price, originally $200, $300, whatever they're charging for it. But then, you would sell it to him and he would sell it to you, and they didn't get any of the money involved in the resale market. But once they put the textbooks online, they could stop producing those hard copy covers and require students to buy passwords. And he said the reason they could offer me so much money for this new job that they were going to create for me was because in the future, the digital technologies would assure that every student paid full price every time and that their company got all the money. So there's a different vision. You have the same technologies. On the one hand, the one that David Wiley talks about, where the cost of copying and distribution falls to nothing, and the price that should be available to students could conceivably also fall to nothing or to almost nothing. And then the textbook publishers who see it as the opportunity to raise the prices. It's the same tool, it's the same hammer, right? It's the same tool, but who decides how it's going to be used? Is it going to be used to generate benefits for the general public, or is it going to be used to concentrate profits for a few near monopoly textbook publishers? Who makes that decision? And so for the first 10 or 15 years of the digital revolution, the textbook publishers and compliant university administrators and college and public officials allowed the publishing community to make those decisions. And guess what? They decided to rob us all blind. They decided to cut off access, to institute these time-expiring passwords that you sometimes have to buy, which are even worse than the old. At least when you bought an old-fashioned textbook and you had to drop out of the class or something like that, you could use the book again in the next semester, or you could sell the book. You buy a time-expiring password and you get sick and you have to drop the class, well, guess what? The next semester, more likely than not, you're going to be asked to buy that same password again. So they took a technology that could have made things less expensive and more available and used it as a way to drive up their prices and to drive up the cost of an education. Every student pays full price every time. That's how they were going to use these technologies. Who benefits from that? Not us, not you, not knowledge. So that's where our Creative Commons licenses come in. I'll just whip through this part here, but these are the symbols that we use. If you see one of these symbols on a book or a document, it means it's been licensed for your free use. If you click on an electronic copy, it'll take you back to the actual license itself. The license is available in 3 formats. One format is sort of plain, easy to read English, where you can understand what rights you have for sharing it and using it. Another is a legalese document that if it ever came into a court or something, our lawyers could defend if there was ever a legal case related to somebody using the materials improperly, for example, trying to sell something that they don't have the rights to sell. And there's a machine readable version that only search engines and others can see. Like if you want to do a search for, free Creative Commons resources on anthropology, the machine can go out using metadata tags and find those resources and list that for you. All of this is available for free on our website, thanks primarily to the generous support of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, who've given Creative Commons probably $12, $15 million over the years since this program was started 18 years ago. Those are the 3 layers I talked about, and that's the legal. There's the legal version of the license, and here's the machine readable version. All of these things are behind a Creative Commons licensed intellectual property document. Again, those are the documents that are used in place of commercial textbooks in your classes for the zero textbook cost degree programs. Now, when I got involved in this and started promoting this idea, it was from the place of wanting to make cost of higher education lower, to lower the cost, to make it more, just thinking about my own experience. When I was a struggling college student, I used to go to the bookstore at the beginning. That's why it took me 8 years to get through. I'd go to the bookstore at the beginning of each semester, and I'd walk through the bookstore and I'd look and see how much the books cost for the classes I was figuring out, and I would take as many classes as I could afford the books for. And that was how I would meter my education, because there were they called them Board of Governor waivers back then. But poor students like myself could get the tuition waived. The tuition wasn't the most expensive. The most expensive thing that the school was associated with the cost of those damn books, and I just couldn't afford them. So I'd go through the. So when you see Creative Commons licenses, those books are now free and freely available. And now at Rice University, they started organizing these open education resources. Like I said, when we first started, people said nobody would use them. And I think one of the very first users of it was David Wiley, who put up a free, here one of his colleagues put up a free definition of an isosceles triangle, right? Before that, if you wanted to have an authoritative definition of it, you'd have to go buy a math textbook and it would tell you. So it started out when we used to call them learning objects, but they were just discrete little pieces of knowledge that academics put online for free with a Creative Commons license. And then eventually those items were organized into a chapter on a topic or an entire textbook. And then OpenStax at Rice University started organizing open educational resources into the equivalent of textbooks that were used in initially in the 50 most popular college classes, so that there would be an alternative to a commercial textbook for basically every class that a college student needed to take. And here at CSUCI, you and your leaders have taken it one step further to put you on the forefront, the cutting edge, as President Beck said, of this global open educational resources movement by organizing the materials not only so that they're available as textbook substitutes, but that you can organize an entire degree program based on open educational resources that where the student can go through it and not have to spend a penny on commercial textbooks. And at the same time, because they're not spending money on commercial textbooks, you get to keep your textbooks. You get to maintain access to your textbooks to help you in your future studies. Maybe you need to go back and review something. It always struck me as crazy when I was a student. I don't know if you do it here, but when I was a student at the end of, and later a community college board member, at the end of every semester, there'd be these big banners that would tell students to sell their books back to the bookstore, right? I don't know if you do that here, or you've seen those kind of programs. And even as a student, 40 years ago, that struck me as crazy. I mean, well, it seemed to me like a hospital saying, sell us back your medicines. I mean, if the books were so unimportant, then why were the faculty members assigning them for students to buy? And when have you ever been in an educated person's house and seen no books? And yet we're encouraging the poorest students to get rid of their books. Come to school and we're going to encourage you to get rid of all your books. What's more upside down? So with open education resources, with curriculum built on open, you get to keep all of the learning materials you use over time. And the other thing we discovered is that when the materials are open, there's more opportunities for other faculty members, other scholars and learned individuals, students often too, to improve the materials, to customize them, to translate them. Maybe there's a great textbook on nursing, and because it's openly licensed, somebody can translate it into Spanish. And now you don't need permission to do that. And now you have a Spanish language version of it. So for all of the students for whom Spanish is their first language, they now have free access to a language, to a book in their native. You can't do that with a commercial textbook. If you did that if you translated, a Pearson textbook into Spanish and tried to give it away, they'd haul you off in handcuffs, right? So the difference is the policy decisions that are being made about how we use these resources that determine whether they benefit the general public, whether they benefit students like yourself and other students around the world, or whether they are crafted in a way to just funnel a small number to a small number of individuals the hard-earned money that all of you are asked to pay for them. So zero textbook cost degrees are the furthest point of the evolution of this trend that I'm talking about. 1 billion licenses around the world, right? Now hundreds of textbooks, and right here at your school, at CSUCI, the first college in the country, I think in the world, the first college in the country in the world to use these materials. So that's part of the message I want to bring to you today, is to recognize that you are at a place that is making history. That is making history that will be, that's important now, and that will be increasingly important in the years ahead. And that you have a chance, because you're here, to shape that history and to involve yourselves in it. And the importance of zero textbook cost degrees, I want to emphasize, have to do with overcoming the psychology of poverty. Poverty is humiliating. I know from my own personal experience. There's a sentiment among some people, particularly people who've never really been poor, that when they set up a social service program, they often don't think about what the clients who access that program, what it does to their dignity when they need to use the program. There's kind of a feeling that, well, they're poor, they know that they're poor, so if they have to grovel a little bit, if it makes them, they're used to that, right? And what they don't realize is that when you're poor, at least my experience, and it's true of many people I've known, is that it makes you more sensitive to being humiliated, right? You're so tired of that. You're so tired of being made to feel less than, that you tend to avoid circumstances where you might have, it's like somebody asks you to go out to lunch with them. I don't know if any of you have been in this position. They ask you to go out to lunch with them and you say no, because you're not going to be able to afford what's on the menu, right? And you don't want to tell them that, so you make up some kind of an excuse, but you don't want to go to, or you agree to go to lunch with some friends, right? And you sit down at a restaurant and maybe you order the $4 soup, right? Because it's what you can afford. And then the bill comes at the end and usually somebody who has more money than you says, well, let's just split the bill evenly. It's like, no, I ordered the $4 soup because I can't afford to pay for half of your lobster salad. If I could afford to pay for half of your lobster, I would have ordered one myself. But that humiliation is part of being the experience, the day-to-day, the grinding day-to-day experience of poverty, of not having enough, right? And the same thing is true of educational opportunities. What a zero textbook cost degree, what making one available, what your administrators and your leaders here have done is it has a signaling power. It says to the prospective student, this, especially for a student of limited means, which is most students around, especially globally, it says to a student of limited means, this door is safe for you to go through. You're not going to be in a situation where you get 1 year into this program and you're going to turn around and be asked to pay for some textbook that you can't afford, and then have to endure the humiliation at that point of dropping out of the program. So a lot of students, particularly a lot of poor students, tend to avoid situations where they might be exposing themselves to humiliation. And what a zero textbook cost degree program is it's really an anti-humiliation machine, right? It's a big sign that says, safe to learn here. We promise you that you will be able to go from the first day of this program to the last day of this program, and nobody is going to spring some unwelcome surprise on you, asking you for money that you don't have. Sometimes people who have lived more privileged lives will say, well, you know, it's only $25, the workbook for this class. It's only $35. Well, only $35 might as well be $350 if you don't have any money. If people don't understand, when you have no money, it means you have no money. And so when somebody says, well, it's just $25, what that tells you is that they've never had no money themselves, because they don't know that just $25 might as well be just $25,000. If you don't have it, what are you supposed to do? Steal it? So a zero textbook cost degree program eliminates that opportunity for unwelcome humiliation. And in that respect, it's one of the most effective anti-poverty programs because it makes it safe for people to access it and invites different types of people to take advantage of educational opportunities. That's the work that's going on here. But it turns out that it has an even better benefit, we've now discovered, because now we've been doing this for 10 years or so. And one of the things that we've learned is when these materials are free and open, that means they can be collaboratively improved to make them better. Like I said, translated into other languages, improved with localized examples. And we now know that students do better in classes where the learning materials are free. Right? One of the big questions we had originally in the beginning was, are these free learning materials going to be as good as the more expensive proprietary? It turns out that they are better. It turns out that they are better. One of the reasons that they're better, for example, is that because they're free, every student has access to them on the first day of class. You don't have to wait for your financial aid check shows up and then buy the book 3 weeks into the semester where you're already falling behind. So, and there are other reasons that they're better. They can be translated into other languages. You can study them in your own native language. They get collaboratively improved over time. When there's an error in a commercial textbook, it could be there for a generation. If it's in an open textbook, it can be fixed tomorrow. So we've come up with a solution through these open educational resources that are not only less expensive, but that lead to better quality opportunities. And that's the advantage of this. It's the difference between a stop sign and a go sign when it comes to making educational opportunities available for people at financial risk. One tells them, warning, this might not be a safe place for you, and then the OER, the ZTC, the zero tech, it tells them this is a safe place for you. We know who you are. We've taken into account the need that you have to preserve your dignity, and we have architected our program to allow you and to allow us to help you preserve your dignity. We've removed a toll booth in education, right? The last people that ought to have to pay a toll to achieve career-enriching education are young people just starting out in their careers. If anybody should have to pay a toll, it should be old people like me who have some money. But to ask people who are young, just starting out, that they have to fork over what little they're able to earn to pay for something that really they don't need to pay for is just a really unfair toll. So it's also created a new opportunity for faculty. I mentioned my friend, Professor Truman Cross, the guy, remember the guy who came to my door with the $200? So 25 years after that experience, Truman and I stayed friendly. for many, many years after that. And by then I'd had some success, you know, helped start Marketplace, was on the radio, was writing for the newspapers and magazines. My name had gotten around. And there was going to be an election for the Board of Trustees of the Foothill De Anza Community College District, the place where I had gone 8 years to earn a degree. And Truman organized a group of the faculty to get me to run for the open seat on the Foothill De Anza Community College Board of Trustees. And of course I said no, because you needed a lot of money to run a political campaign. And he didn't take no for an answer. He and another professor, and actually 2 other professors, went and opened a bank account and started raising money to promote, because there had never been a graduate of that community college on its Board of Trustees. All of the people on the Board of Trustees were like people who had gone to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and all of this, you know, who had the credentials. And nobody who'd ever gone to the school had ever been on the, and they wanted to elect somebody who had had some success in life, who had been one of their graduates. And a lot of the faculty members knew me, because like I said, it took me 8 years to graduate. Here's one of the ironies of that. I remember in the 8 years, I felt so bad. I felt so depressed often, because I was watching kids who had trust funds and money behind them and whatever, and they were racing through school and everything. And I was, you know, either hitchhiking to school. Sometimes faculty members picked me up hitchhiking on my way to school. But because I was there so long, they all got to know me, and I got to know them. So 25 years later, they all dug into their pockets and they raised money and they ran me for a seat on their Board of Trustees. And at first it looked like nobody was going to run against me, and that I'd be sort of swept into office just because of no opposition. But at the last minute, a mayor, the former mayor of one of the towns in the large community college district, decided he wanted to be on the Board of Trustees. So he announced his candidacy, and I thought for sure I'd get creamed. And the faculty organized people to go out, students and faculty, knocking on doors, bringing brochures that they paid for, explaining why it was important to get the first graduate of the school on the Foothill De Anza Community College Board of Trustees. And on election day, we beat that mayor. And not only did we beat the mayor, we beat the mayor in his own town, right? And I became the first graduate of the school ever on the Board of Trustees. And the very first thing I did as a member of that Board of Trustees was to set up the country's first program to create free open educational resources as substitutes for commercial textbooks. De Anza College in Cupertino was the first community college in the country to begin using OER textbooks. One of the faculty members there who donated her work to support the first statistics textbook, it's called Collaborative Statistics. Her free textbook on that one campus has already saved students more than $3 million. She's a community college instructor. She's the most generous philanthropist that the community college has ever had, right? Not because she had so much money to give away, but because she was able to give away her talents and her resources that led to the direct savings. That's $3 million that our local community college students could use to pay for housing and food and transportation and childcare. So it became an incredibly rewarding opportunity for Professor Olowski, who did that work, and for many other faculty members who then got drawn into communities of scholars who began collaborating on creating these open educational resources and using them and sharing them. It used to be said about academia that the way you survived in academia was you publish or perish. You either produce literary output, scholarship, or you perish. You're not an important person. But we're gradually beginning to change that psychology because of the work of faculty members here and at allied institutions, where now it's not all about what you can publish on your own, but it's also about what you can organize, what collaborations you can create to make new scholarly resources available to students and faculty that then distinguishes somebody as being an enabler of the educational experiences of others. So it's a sea change. It's deciding, it's playing a conscious role in deciding how the hammer is going to be used. How are we going to use this hammer of networking and internet and digital technologies? Are we going to use it to make just a handful of people obscenely rich so that they can go buy Hawaiian Islands? Or are we going to use it so that it benefits society as a whole and students as a group? And those are the decisions that are in your hands. And the consequences of your participating in those decisions will have an impact not only here, but around the world. Not long ago, I went and visited South Africa, where I was invited to tour public schools that are being used in the townships, predominantly Black South Africans in impoverished school districts. And guess what I saw them using? Open educational resources produced at my old community college, right? These resources benefit when they're free and available online. They benefit not only the students at the school where they were created, but they have the potential to have a reverberating benefit around the world. And that's what positions you to take part in an extraordinary future. The fact that this school is now recognized nationally and internationally as being at the leadership of this movement, the first college in the country to offer entire undergraduate degree programs based on open educational resources, it positions you to become shapers of the future. You don't need to think about, as you move forward in your academic careers, only think about applying for jobs that exist. You can now think about creating new industries, creating new jobs that employ others, and restructuring the way our economy works so that it serves more people at a higher level. And the power is enormous. We've already seen some indications, just to give you some quick ideas. I came across, there's been a particular problem, if we have any virologists in the room, microbiologists, as they were investigating the AIDS epidemic, which has recently yielded some promising pharmacological therapies. But there was a particular problem that stymied the AIDS researchers for a long time, having to do with the way proteins fold in the AIDS virus that make it hard for a traditional vaccine to work. And the virology companies, the pharmaceutical companies, had been working on this project for a problem for a long time and making very little progress, when a group of them decided to create an open game, right? To allow students and others to experiment with different methodologies of folding proteins to see if they could find the magic key to unlocking the secrets of how the AIDS virus could be stopped in its tracks. And after spending 8 or 10 years working on this problem in secretive private labs where everybody was trying to patent the solution, you know, and then sell it to the world, they opened it up as a free game that anybody could play. And within about 8 weeks, a group of students solved the problem, right? Because when you have 10 million people working on a problem, its solution comes into view a lot more quickly than if you have just a handful of people working in secret. So open educational resources are not only a set of resources, but they're a way of approaching problems that involve collaboration and cooperation and openness, and that very often those collaborations lead to scientific and technical and academic progress that you couldn't have imagined happening in any other way. And now there's a number of these games that are available. You just have to sort of insert the problem. The Wikimedia Education Foundation is another great example. It has struck many of us as being nutty. When you take a class and you're asked to write a term paper, for example, and you turn in your term paper, and the teacher gives it a grade, and then what happens typically to that term paper? It gets thrown in the trash. Or maybe you save it in your scrapbook. But what if we started using our classes to create shared educational resources? What if when you study some factor in biology or history or sociology or whatever, and you learn something that's important, you can go and place it online in an academic resource like Wikipedia, so that other students you can create artifacts of your learning that then the next group of students can learn from and build on. So instead of your term paper going in the trash, it becomes what the next year's students study, so that their term paper is even better and more important and more significant. We can begin to build collaborative scholarship through these open educational practices through the sharing of student work, not only faculty work, but student work. And the Wikimedia Education Foundation is pioneering this. There's opportunities for all of you here to become subject matter experts in a topic where what you write gets relied on by people around the world and where you become known as an expert in the field who then gets consulted or invited into professional projects. None of that would have happened before if you just throw your term paper in the trash. Nobody would know who you are. But by using these open educational resources, practices that are being pioneered here, you have an opportunity to bring yourselves to national and international prominence as experts in areas that are of interest to you, where you're willing to dig in and do the work. The last big idea I'll leave you with is one that I'm working on now with a team of European universities led by Sorbonne universities. But when I was working in the Obama administration, I got invited by the US Navy to come see how they train cybersecurity experts and jet pilots. Two very important occupations within the US military. Take cybersecurity, for example. I don't know if you knew this, I didn't before, but our ships in the Navy are under constant cybersecurity attack from our adversaries, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians. They're constantly trying to take over the cyber systems on our battleships, because if they can take over the computer system, it's just as good as sinking the ship, right? They can disable the ship, they can make the ship's bombs blow up, you know, so the ships are constantly under attack. And they need experts to defend the ship's systems from these attacks and also to repair the ship's systems once they've been attacked. But once those experts are trained and positioned on a ship, when their enlistment period is over, very often they can get a better job, higher pay in private industry, so they leave. So the military has to train a large number of these experts to move through their system and to be ready to protect our ships. And they invited a group of us over to see how they do it. And they don't do it in any of the ways that are more typical to the educational experiences we've all had. They don't give a young pilot a bubble test, you know, A, B, C, or D. And if the pilot gets, you know, 80%, give her the keys to the $300 million plane. They put her in a simulator, right? Same thing with cybersecurity on the ships. They have these simulators set up, kind of like a flight simulator, if any of you have ever played with a flight simulator online. And they put them through a bunch of different simulated situations. And if the pilot, you know, in one situation, one wing's on fire, or in another situation, you're getting wrong data from your instruments or something like that. And if the pilot can figure this out in the simulator and land the plane 10 times out of 10 times on the aircraft carrier, then they give her the keys to the $300 million. Well, we're on the verge, we have it within our capacity, and a group of European universities is now collaborating on this, to create the same kind of simulators for chemistry and physics, algebra, right? So instead of being given a test in class, this open assessment, open online assessment would hang free on the internet, where it changes every time a student takes it. The specific concepts that are being assessed remain the same, but the specific questions change. So there's no way to cheat, right? It's kind of like playing pinball. You can watch me play pinball, but then when it's your turn, you can either master the flippers or not. The ball's going to fall a different way each time, and you're either a pinball master or you're not. And it's the same thing. You either know physics or chemistry or you don't. These simulators will be, and these are going to be open assessments that are available online that can be used by professors at the end of a course to determine whether you've learned what you're supposed to learn for that class. That's what's coming. That's what's coming. That's what this college has the opportunity to lead and develop in. The goal here, of course, the larger goal, is to make it possible for anyone to rise academically from anywhere. Because once the test is online free, then it becomes possible for students to figure out, once they know what they need to know, there'll become a new healthy competition in helping students obtain the skills and resources that they need in order to achieve success and mastery in those programs. So the point of all of this is that we and you here are at the cutting edge of something that's going to be, that already is globally important and whose importance is going to grow even more in the future. And by your good fortune, you are in this place now to take advantage of that. So what could you, and I just threw some ideas, I don't know how good people can see this in the back of the room, but as you begin to think about what the opportunities are in this field, and you match it up with whatever you're interested in, whether you're a dancer or a musician or an economist or an artist, want to be a doctor, in virtually any field you can think of, there are opportunities to organize and participate in collaborative projects that let you have a world-shaking impact. What could be accomplished working together? I don't know if you can see it in the back, but we don't know when there's an earthquake in California, we don't know right now which of our public schools are going to fall down. Wouldn't that be a good thing to know? Isn't that something that would be worth figuring out? That's the kind of thing you could do as an open collaborative project. Does anybody have a good index right now of what all of the economic needs are of all the CSUCI students? Who knows who needs what? Those things could be developed and archived. And there's I'm running through this quickly because I'm running out of time. But there's so many opportunities bounded only by your own imagination about how to use these tools and technologies to change the world going forward. So let me conclude, sort of back where I started. I often get asked, I mentioned we started this work at the Foothill De Anza Community College students, at developing the first open educational resources after starting Creative Commons 18 years ago. And then President Obama got elected. And I was the most floored person on the planet. I mean, we had contributed, I think, $100 to his campaign. And my wife and I made sandwiches for the local headquarters, but we were not big shots in that. But after President Obama got elected, he instructed the leaders of his transition team, he said, I want to staff all of the top positions in the US Department of Education with leaders from the community college system who are doing innovative work to help poor people access educational opportunities. And a couple of weeks after Obama was elected, my phone rang. Could have knocked me over with a feather. And they said that I was under consideration for one of the highest positions in the US Department of Education to run and implement a national program based on what we were doing with open educational resources at the Foothill De Anza Community College District. But they swore me to secrecy. They said, you can't tell anyone that we made you this offer because the FBI has to check you out. And I thought, well, that'll be the end of that. So thank you for the offer. And they said, we'll get back to you, but we just wanted to know that if we made you this offer, would you accept it? And I said, sure, but I thought it would never happen. And then as the following weeks went on, I started getting visits from neighbors who said, Hal, the FBI was here. They wouldn't tell us why, but they were asking a bunch of questions about you. Is everything all right? And I couldn't tell them. I told them, well, please cooperate with them, answer any questions that they have. And they said, well, why do you? I said, oh, I can't tell you why. And about 2.5 months after that all started, and after the FBI was interviewing our neighbors, my phone rang again on a Friday night at like 8 o'clock at night. And it was somebody calling from the White House, where it was already 1 in the morning. They said, we just got the notice that your FBI clearance has come through. Can you start on Monday morning? From President Obama. Can you start on Monday morning? So I went and I told my wife, you have to forgive me. I get emotional about this even now. And I told my wife, she was already in bed, that they've asked me that my clearance came through and they've asked me to start on Monday. She says, we're moving to Washington? And I said, yeah, that's what's going to happen. And I went out in the backyard to think about it, my head swimming about all of these experiences that I've described to you, growing up in poverty, welfare and food stamps, being a high school pushout, writing the letter to the editor, advocating for free open learning resources and the use of all of these thoughts swimming in my head as I sat in the background in the backyard there. And the next thing I knew, the sun had come up. I'd been sitting in the backyard that night, all night, just my head filled with thoughts about what was possible, about the path that I'd been on, and about what we might be able to do for others. Somehow it seemed to close a circle for me, where there was a redemptive component to the struggle and the suffering, where now it mattered. Now my experience actually mattered because I could put it to work for others. And that next Monday morning at 7:30 in the morning, I was sworn in and had my first meeting at the White House later that day. I've had the most extraordinary life. Don't worry about me. I could get hit by a truck tomorrow, and more than ever I dreamed was possible has already been put on my plate. Sometimes people visit me and they ask me, particularly young people. I had a group of students come visit me in Washington from Maricopa Community College. And one of the students raised her hands and she says, Hal, how do you get, I'd like to be you someday. I'd like to be working for President Obama or some future president like that. How do you make that happen? What advice would you have for me? And I told her the only answer that I had, which is that being a leader is a lot like being a writer. I mean, I became a writer, you remember the story, for starters, because it was one of the few professions where you didn't have to ask anybody for permission, right? To become a writer, all I did is I took out a piece of paper and I started writing. And nobody tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know, yesterday you were not a writer, but today you're a writer. You become a writer by writing. And I told her the same thing. You become a leader by leading. Nobody will ever tap any of you on the shoulder and say, you know, yesterday you were not a leader, but today you're a leader. That's not how it happens. The way it happens is you tap yourself on the shoulder. You say, I'm going to lead. And you become a leader by leading. And that's the opportunity that you have here in this place, which is uniquely position you to lead in the next evolution of learning, teaching, education, and scholarship. I've often had a lot of people tell me, you know, Hal, I could have been just like you. I just never had the right opportunity. I could have been somebody too. I was just never in the right place at the right time. I think a lot of people go through life with that feeling, like they could have been more than they were, if only they'd been in the right place at the right time. So if you remember anything from this talk, what I want you to remember today is that this is the right time. This is the right place. And you are the right people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hal. We've heard some of Hal's story before, and I think you can recognize why we've asked him to come back again and again, because it's a powerful story that resonates with a lot of people, and I think resonates with our campus. And thank you for making the time to be here and share with us. So we are running a little short of time, but I really want our student voice to be heard as well. So if our student panel could please come up. We have 2 students from the communication program and 2 students from the early childhood studies program. So you'll hear from our students who have graciously volunteered their time. Thank you so much. Oh, perfect. So this is just to let all of you know, I'll have you each introduce yourself to everyone, and then I will ask a few questions. You're not required by any means to answer all of the questions. Just answer what question you feel you may have a response that you might want to share, and we'll go from there. So if you want to start, just go ahead and, name and program and year.
My name is Carla Flamenco. I'm an early childhood studies major.
I'm Richard Gonzalez. I'm also an early childhood studies major. My name is Andrew Doran. I'm an organizational communication major.
My name is Phoenix Thor, and I'm also an organizational comm major.
Thank you. So I'll start with, what impact has the OpenCI efforts where you've enrolled in a course that did not have additional cost for a textbook or course materials have on you individually? Anybody who wants to respond?
Well, as a communications major and as a disability student, these courses that have the low to no cost materials have really helped me, because it has given me more of an opportunity to work on the materials without having to constantly go to the library or carry huge textbooks around. It's made it easier to access materials and to help other students understand what they need to do in the class. And I think that's a really beneficial thing to have.
I think for me, it's kind of different. With OpenCI, I've become more aware of the flight that students have on campus. I am very privileged. My parents are paying for my education and therefore paying for all my textbooks, so I've never had the stress of paying for texts. And now coming to OpenCI and seeing how textbook costs are free and are available to everyone, and everyone's able to participate in class because of it, I can understand more, as Mr. Plotkin was saying earlier, about how students get really far behind. I've seen it in other classes, and coming at CI, I see that everyone's involved from the get-go, and because of that, we have a better educational experience. So I also benefit from having it on my laptop and not having to go to the textbook as well, but I'm able to understand how students have struggled without having the text immediately.
I can speak to the point about just having the textbook or just having the materials available to you at all times. I'm a commuting student, so anytime I have a chance to work on stuff, I know it's all on my computer right there to go, and that's definitely how it's been super helpful to me.
For me, I feel like it's such a relief, and I feel that it makes me more connected to the program, and it's encouraged me to use my voice and my knowledge for this program. Like, if I take home this article, I can share that knowledge with my colleagues or anything, or with y'all, my peers and everything.
Great, thank you. So what have you spent money on instead of buying a textbook?
I played hooky for a week and went to Japan for the Rugby World Cup in October. So all the textbooks that I've saved since coming to Channel Islands, I spent more in my 1 year at Santa Barbara City College than I have in 2 years here at Channel Islands. So those 2 years of savings literally paid for my flights, my accommodation, and my tickets, and all my food for a whole 10 days in Japan to watch a bunch of rugby and not be in school.
For me, it's been for my medical appointments, because as I said, I am disabled, and that causes a lot of stress and a lot of need to go traveling for medical appointments. So whatever money I save, it goes to the Ubers, it goes to actually getting to the medical appointments, and it goes to the medications I need.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure, so what have you spent the money that you've saved on textbooks on?
So something, I really rely on my extra paychecks that come towards me. So something that I was able to buy is, I was able to buy my own graduation items and a little gift for me. So like my class ring, like I wasn't able to afford that for high school. So like it made like me cry a little. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting my class ring. So that was something I was able to buy, and it was like, man, I did that for myself. Like I did that for me, and now I'm gonna walk down the aisle wearing something that I bought and my bracelet looking good and all that. So
I've spent it on gas, which I think is unique to the Channel Islands, kind of where a commuting campus. My commute is about an hour. I come down here throughout, I'm in my final semester. It's varied from twice a week to 3 and 4 times a week. And it gives me leftover money to pay for that. So that's how it's been helpful for me.
Great, thank you. So you have a significant audience here. So given the opportunity to tell campus and your faculty and maybe even other students or campus leaders, what would you want them to know about your perceptions related to textbook costs for students?
I find Openci to be a basic need for students on campus. I kind of backed into Openci because I am a journalist here on campus, being the editor of news for the CI News, the paper here. And last year, I actually had an interview with Professor Jenkins with regards to basic needs on campus because of the hot meals program that was happening here and getting more hot meals for students that didn't have that every day. And Professor Jenkins made a comment, and this was in October of last year, 2018, that a lot of the students that need hot meals also need textbooks. And that's why his class did not have a textbooks cost assorted with his program, which I found interesting, and that was kind of my first thought. And then I did the graduation initiative article talking about the graduation initiatives for CSUs across the state and how a big initiative was to get more students in and out of school faster. But having an Openci program at this campus, we're actually ahead of almost all the CSUs across the state because students actually have the materials to graduate. And then this also came true when we wrote about it earlier this year, and it made me realize that a majority of the students who are here, who are commuters, like yourself and myself, and 85% of us in this room most likely, and students who do need the extra help. And we are a Hispanic serving institute, and we do have a lot of people that need extra help, and that's great. And I'm glad that this university can help with that, but Openci helps it be more available. It becomes, as Mr. Plotkin said earlier, we become kind of an institution that doesn't shame people because they're poor. And I think that's important, and understanding that this has always been an open campus. And I think it's important for students to understand that because it's an open campus and we are really tight knit because we are a small university, understanding that people go through different struggles and adversities in their life, and not being able to afford a textbook shouldn't be one of those adversities they're going through.
Anyone else? So what would you want your faculty and or leaders at CI to know about textbook costs? And you don't have to all answer, but if you wanted to add something, please feel free.
I think what I've found to be very beneficial from having the open source is just when you get one textbook for one class, you're really limited to one view. And yes, the textbook may have multiple authors, but they're all kind of centered around the same idea. And whereas when you have the open source materials, it's just, there's so many multiple viewpoints you get. And I think it really shows students how to find information, where they're not just limited to one source. It shows how to broaden and diversify what kinds of opinions you're letting in, what kinds of knowledge you're able to take in, and really give you a more broad view of what you're trying to focus in on. And I think it does come with the added benefit of it's free, you know, and it's like, you have this benefit from it, plus it's free. It's like, why not? Why not embrace it? Just, I mean, even if you're not a Z major lead, or if you're not a part of this program, it's like, just do it anyways. It's better for the students. And I think from the perspective as a professor, you're giving them so much more than you would be giving them from a singular textbook. And it's much cheaper than making them buy 7 textbooks too. So.
And to go off his point, I think you can use the Openci textbooks in multiple different classes. For example, I've used several of the textbooks that my communications professors and some of the psychology professors have given me to connect them to the other classes that I'm in. And it has helped immensely because it gives you the same perspective of you're connecting each course to each other, and it gives you a better perspective of what's going on around you.
Great, thank you. All right, final question. How does the use of no-cost materials impact the quality of course materials? In other words, do you think there's any difference in quality of the education you're being delivered because you're having an open or free source rather than, or maybe library accessible materials rather than a traditional textbook from a publisher?
That's a good question. For me, I feel like it's teaching me something that I would have never known about. And I don't know, this is a very tricky question. And I feel like how our colleague or keynote speaker said, like, this is giving us the opportunity to speak our voices and how we feel about the articles and all that, the resources. So we're a very diverse community and we're a diverse campus. And I feel like each of our minds and each of our thoughts come together and we can build a stronger community with that. That's it.
I would agree with that. I think it builds a strong community. And I think also as well, I kind of said this a couple times, but I really believe in it. It creates a better learning environment within the classroom because everyone already has the textbook and everyone doesn't have to stress out about starting 3 weeks late because they couldn't afford it or can't afford it whatsoever, or have to rely on their friend to get notes from because they don't have the textbook and the professor really requires it in that class and they're just kind of barely skimming by. But having Openci creates a better learning environment, not only for the instructor or the professor, but for all students involved in the class.
Like, I think kind of just similar to what I said for the last question, it's like the quality really lies in the variety you get from one course, maybe containing several different, 10 authors versus just one author, of course, across the semester. Sorry, I had another point I wanted to add. And then too, I think just from the perspective of just having open source, it's like, I feel like, they are quality materials, but I feel like even to maybe like there's that extra verification a professor has to do, that a professor actually has to really look into what they're providing, make sure it is attached to what they're trying to talk about. Whereas I feel it's probably easier to just think, oh, this is a textbook from a reputable publisher, let's just use this. I feel like there's more connection to the material for the professor, and then more connection that the student gets out of it because it's something the professor can more stand by versus this is just the textbook that everyone's used up until this point, so I'll use it too.
Thank you. Any questions? We have like 3 minutes, maybe 2.5, but I want to open it up to any questions that the audience might have for the student panel before we close. No? Well, thank you so much for sharing with us and giving your feedback. We really appreciate it.
Just as a thank you to all the professors and the faculty that have supported us as students, because without your guys' support and without you guys working on this initiative, we would not have this opportunity to share our experience or to get the quality education that we're getting. So again, I would like to give a big round of applause to all of you for that, because it has impacted us so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just in closing, we did highlight and thank Jill Leasted, who we have a gift for that I want to bring you up for that you missed. And really our recognition was really acknowledging Jill's impact on launching this and bringing this, getting us involved, both Jacob and I, and helping us lead this effort. And it's really her that's made the U in unicorn, as Jacob said. And all we can do is thank her for having vision for us to move this forward, and thank all the faculty for all of your hard work and efforts. Make sure and check out the faculty spotlight posters. We have recognized some of our faculty that have made big impact with students in communications, chemistry, health science, business, a number of our programs, and you'll see our leads on the poster. Thank you so much for coming. I don't know if you want to say anything. No. Okay. Thank you for being here.